Hey there, and welcome to the Beginner's Garden Podcast, and welcome to November. You know, this time of year when it feels like the garden is done for the year, but maybe if you're like me, you still catch yourself wandering out in the garden just to see what's hanging on. That's what I did just this weekend. And of course, I'm noticing that things are slowing down, but there's still a lot happening and there's a lot going on if you know where to look. From protecting tender crops to dreaming about what you're planting for next season, any gardener knows that this is the time of year where we're thinking and bubbling with lots of different ideas. Today, I'm going to take you through my November garden to show you exactly what I'm doing right now, what I am protecting because the frost will have started to arrive, what I'm planting, and yes, I'm still planting. I've got the last crop of the year, and it's not garlic, and I'll tell you what that is, and how I'm setting myself up for a strong start next spring. And by the way, if you didn't have a chance to do the free 5-day garden audit last week, it is still available. You can go to journeywithjill.net/audit. This is a great way to reflect on this season, especially as you're walking out in your garden and you're taking note of what worked and what didn't. And that way you can get a good start for next year. But today we're going to be talking about 10 things that I listed out that I'm doing in my garden in November. And number one is actually coming upon me this weekend. I'm recording this a week in advance. So by the time you hear it, I've probably already started to do this because we potentially could get a frost this weekend, which is actually right on target. The difference this year for us is that we have been very warm in October. So we've gone from 80s close to 90 most of the month, and now we've got a frost, which is, I'm learning par for the course here in Arkansas, but it doesn't make it any easier when mentally I'm having to shift from this feels like summer to, oh no, I need to figure out how to protect my crops. And what I'm going to be doing is transitioning many of my green stock planters into the greenhouse. Now, if you have a green stock planter, but you don't have a greenhouse, this is not to protect the planters themselves. They are fine outside all season long. But for me, I'm transitioning some of them so that some of the more tender crops I can have protected, and even the ones that aren't tender, such as my greens and even my strawberries. One thing I'm for sure putting in the greenhouse is my lemon tree. I will eventually bring it into the garage because when it starts getting really cold at night and the heater that I have will only do about 10 to 15 degrees warmth at night, eventually it will need to go in the garage. But for right now, I really want to capture that solar energy and the warmth of the daytime during this season until I decide to bring it into the garage. So the lemon tree is definitely going in the greenhouse. It's got some green lemons on it right now, and I want to make sure to get those where I can harvest them before the winter. I also want to extend my basil in my green stock just a little bit longer. I know that it doesn't like temperatures below 40, but since we're still like frost range is going to be in the upper 30s, mid 30s, the heater should be able to take care of that so that I can have a little bit longer with my basil. So for my other green stalks, which have arugula and spinach and lettuce, I probably won't put those in the greenhouse because it's not that necessary. I probably won't do that until temperatures for sure get below freezing. And even then, that's not 100% required. I've just found they grow a little bit better. So number one for me is transitioning my green stalks or some of them into the greenhouse ahead of our frost. Number two is as the frost comes, pretty much all of my summer crops are going to be done, including peppers. I do have some bell peppers and some jalapenos still in the garden, so I'm going to be harvesting all of those that I can. And then in that space where the peppers are coming out, I'm planting my last crop of the year, which are short day onions. This is an experiment that I have done. Now, this is very climate dependent, so please understand that if you're not near my climate here in Arkansas, Zone 8A, this may or may not work for you. Or if you're further south than me, this totally can work for you. So just understand if you're even in Zone 7B in Arkansas or similar, this might be a risk, but it's worth trying. But all that to say, I have learned over the years that I can plant short day onions in November and they will survive, or at least they have the last couple of times that I've tried it, they will survive over my winter in Zone 8A. What I did is I ordered transplants from Dixondale Farms. Because I didn't need a whole lot of them, I ordered a short day sampler, which has 105 Y Texas Super Sweet, which is a mild, crisp, very sweet yellow onion. It's great for fresh eating. It only stores 1 to 2 months, but by the time it harvests in May to June, I'll be out of onions at that point and I will be using them fresh. Another one is Texas Early White. It's a white onion, early to mature, mild flavor, still doesn't store that great, only about 2 months, but still, like I said, I can harvest it and use it the first thing that I get as far as the onions go. They'll be the first to harvest. And then Red Creole is also part of that short day sampler. It's got a rich, spicy flavor, and it actually can store for 6 to 7 months. So I still have Red Creole doing great in my storage right now. All of those are planted in November, and the purpose, like I said, is to give me earlier harvest, even if 2 of those 3 aren't great for storage. I will plant intermediate day varieties in the spring, and then I will do some long day varieties that I found work well for me. Mainly Patterson is the main one. But all that to say, I have learned that I really enjoy doing this succession planting of onions where I start my first one in November and then I plant another succession usually in early March to be able to extend my onion harvest for longer. Again, this is very climate dependent and it works for me because I'm kind of in that borderline of short day, intermediate day area. So it works for me. If any of you are more south than me, this is a great time to plant short day onions. And Dixondale, I've been buying from them for a long time. So you just order the transplants. They come in. I think they ship mid-November, and they'll be some of the earliest onions that you get. If you're more north than me, you're probably going to have to wait till the spring. But I do this in the place that the peppers were at because they come out at the frost, which is early November, late October. And then this is perfect timing to just follow those with those short day onions. I plant 4 per square in my raised bed, and I'll look forward to starting to harvest in May or June. Another thing I want to share with regard to overwintering these onions is even if you can't overwinter onions, this is something that I think you'll enjoy learning about because it will apply to all of our crops in the garden. And I didn't realize it until I had a greenhouse and I was able to see it in person to figure out, and I wanted to research what I was seeing. So here's what I have found. When I order the short day onions from Dixondale Farms and I plant half of them usually in my green stalk planters or my grow bags, and then I put them in my greenhouse, and then I do half of them out in the garden where they're not protected. Even though I planted them all on the same day, the ones that are in the greenhouse harvest much sooner. They grow faster and they harvest probably a month sooner than the ones in the garden, even though they were planted at the same time. They're exposed to the same amount of sunlight. There's no other difference except the greenhouse. And this got me thinking of a term that I've heard here and there on different podcasts and learning different things from farmers and such, is the reason for this is that there is a difference in growing degree days for the onions that are in the greenhouse compared to the ones in the garden. And let me explain to you what that meant, because I went years having no idea what this term means. It's part of not having an education or background in horticulture. For those of you guys who do, you know exactly what this is. But for those lay people like me, let me explain it in simple terms. All of our plants need a certain amount of warmth to grow. And it's kind of like collecting points over time. Every day the temperature stays above 40 degrees, and this is an average of the high and low, onions start earning these points, which are called growing degree days. I'm just using the word points because it's just easier to comprehend. I don't think that's an official agricultural term, but the more warm growing degree days or the more points they accumulate, the faster they grow. And what I found with the greenhouse is that since the greenhouse stays warmer, even if it still gets pretty cool at night, but during the day, since a sunny day, even in January, can rise the temperatures to 70, 80 degrees, they're accumulating those growing degree days or points a lot quicker. And this was fascinating to me because I watched how the warmth really did impact how quickly they harvested. Because any plant, and I don't know if this applies to all plants, I would imagine it does, but I was specifically researching onions. But onions in particular have a certain number of growing degree days that they need to mature. this may be one reason why days to maturity that we see on seed packets is relative, because a lot of times it'll depend on how early you plant it. A lot of times, if we're planting things early, then that may affect the number of growing degree days and how quickly it harvests. That also may impact things like summer crops being harvested a lot quicker. There's more growing degrees there. All that to say, this was a happy accident of me discovering this about onions, because the benefit to all of this is that I can plant these onions both places, both in my garden and in the greenhouse, and I can get a longer harvest with that one planting. Almost like a staggered planting where you get a longer harvest, except I didn't have to stagger it. I just planted them both at the same time in two different places. And the ones in my greenhouse harvest in May, and the ones outside harvest in June. And then typically when I'm planting intermediate days in March, those will harvest late June, early July. So I'm getting a staggered harvest of onions. Whereas before I started doing this, it's just one harvest of onions. We put it up and we're good. Now I'm getting the staggered harvest where I can use them fresh for longer. And while this may not apply to you specifically in your location, depending on where you're at, hopefully learning what growing degree days are will help you, especially if you have a greenhouse, because I have a lot of questions about greenhouse growing, but also just knowing how plants respond even in the spring. So let's say in the spring, you have a cooler than usual spring and you notice that your crops just aren't growing as fast. This could be one reason for that. There could be lots of others, but this could be something to look at. Okay, so I went into a deep dive on that. Let's move on to number 3. The next thing that I'm doing is, I've actually already done this, is interplanting lettuce with those onions. The way that I have my bell peppers right now, they are planted in every other square. And in between those squares, you may have heard me talk about in the spring, I had carrots growing there. Well, in the fall, I planted lettuce in between those squares of bell peppers. So when I take out the bell peppers, the onions will go in, but I've got lettuce that will be harvesting, or actually it's pretty mature at this point. And I'll be curious because this year I'm planting and trying out lots of different cold, hardy types of lettuces, and I'm going to see how they do uncovered. I may cover them if I have to in really cold times, but I'm excited about trying a new variety called, is it mosh? It's also called corn salad. It's supposed to be very cold hardy, so I'm going to see how it does. I'm just really curious about that one. You can probably hear this in my voice. I love using fall and winter to test different things, varieties being one of them, growing conditions being another. Because honestly, what do I have to lose at this point? All that I'm going to do is learn one way or the other. If something dies, I learn something about it when it dies. If it doesn't handle a freeze or whatever, I'm learning. And that's one of the most fun things about winter gardening is, to me, anything I get in the fall and winter, honestly, is just bonus. Number 4, it is time for me to harvest my cabbage. My cabbage actually grew pretty fast this year. I think part of it is because it's in a full sun area. And even though cabbage is one of the most cold hardy crops that I grow, especially brassica wise, and sometimes I don't even harvest those till late December, they're pretty mature right now. And I think I'm going to this year do some sauerkraut. I haven't done that in a couple of years, but just to make it fun, I'm going to try a couple of new recipes. Well, one's a recipe that I've liked for a long time called garlic dill sauerkraut. I think it's from the book Fermented Vegetables, maybe. I can't remember the precise name, but it's a pretty popular fermenting book. But I love the garlic dill. It tastes so good. But I also found a recipe that looks fun, and that's an apple jalapeno. All that to say, I just want to try out these different flavors and see what I might like. Sauerkraut as a fermented food is really good for you. It's good for your body. And I'd like to try out some fun things to be able to add that to my diet this fall and winter. Now, even though cabbage is typically one of the last crops that I harvest in the fall and winter, it's also one of the first crops that I plant in the spring. If you're looking toward your spring planting, for me in zone 8A, where my average last frost date is early April, just to give you a little context, I start my seeds usually in mid-January. So I need to be planning ahead. That's only a couple of months from now. I need to decide how many I want to plant and make sure I have enough seeds, because there are certain varieties that I like and I need to make sure that I have enough, or if I need to order some more. And if you're looking at planning ahead right now, whether you've gone through the garden audit or you're just dreaming of things, especially as I'm mentioning different things, This is a time of year where you can start sketching out some of your ideas and start making notes of what you want to do for next season. So if you're doing that, I wanted to let you know that my printable 2026 complete garden planner is now available at journeywithjill.net/shop. For those who have had this planner in the past, you know that it's more than just a planner. My pages also have, some of them have QR codes where you can have bonus resources like how-to videos and guides to help you along the way, so you can actually learn as you plan. So whether you're reflecting on what worked this year or you're dreaming about what you can do next year or a little bit of both, this planner is the perfect companion to help you stay organized and inspired and get all of those notes jotted down. I use it all the time just to make notes of what I might want to do even before I start getting started on my plan. So I want to let you know about that. Task number 5, though, is I wanted to give you a little bit of update on my beets. You may remember that I planted a 4x5 bed entirely of beets, but cutworms got a good portion of it. However, there were enough that made it that I'm going to be able to harvest, and I'm not going to be able to do a big canning day for pickled beets like I usually do in the spring. But the great thing about pickling is you don't necessarily have to can what you're pickling. If you have a small batch, which is what I'm going to have with my small amount of beets, you can prepare them like you would for the canning recipe and prepare the brine. And instead of going through the canning process, the water bath process, you just stick it in the refrigerator. And if these, because they're pickled, they're going to last for a while. Now, I would say the technical term is several weeks maybe, but I mean, I've had mine last even longer than that. All that to say, you don't have to have a huge amount of harvest to still pickle some of these vegetables, especially if you didn't get a huge amount, like has been the case for me this year. I'm excited about that. It will give me, hopefully, I'm hoping a quart, which will last me about a month or 6 weeks or so, which is better than I would have had if the cutworm would have gotten all of it. But I'm excited to be able to harvest at least some beets this year, and then maybe next year I can make some adjustments to be able to have a better one next year. Number 6 is harvesting and using herbs. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago about overwintering herbs. You know that a heavy pruning is definitely not recommended as we head into freezing temperatures, but light harvests are not going to be a problem. One of my favorite herbs to harvest this time of year is sage. Sage before a freeze has a lot of good looking leaves that I can harvest. And I love having these for my Thanksgiving dressing. And I like to have it on hand for winter teas because sage is really good for my throat when I need it. And it's nice to have these fresh because they are so much more potent when they're fresh compared to the spices you buy at the grocery store. But because I'm just harvesting the best looking ones, I'm not doing a heavy pruning, it's going to leave the plant intact so that next year they can start regrowing even more. Now, speaking of Thanksgiving dressing, we're going to be diving deeper into Thanksgiving garden ingredients, sage being one of them, and how they bring both flavor and health benefits to the Thanksgiving table in next week's podcast episode. I'm very excited about this episode as I've been researching it, and it'll be a fun one as we head into the holidays. But going back to herbs, another thing that I noticed in my garden was cilantro. A lot of people ask me, how do you get the best experience? Many people ask me, how do you get cilantro to grow the best? Do you direct sow it or do you transplant it? And honestly, my answer is I let it volunteer in the fall. So let me explain what that means. Cilantro does not like the heat. We've established that on many podcasts. And a lot of times we are planting it in the spring, which makes complete sense because we want cilantro for our salsas and all of that. But if you notice, when it starts getting warm, the days start getting longer, the cilantro starts to get more bitter and it starts to develop a seed stalk. And while, especially as those seeds are forming, which are coriander, by the way, it's not the most attractive thing in the world. I just walk by it and know that this will be temporary because those seeds, when they drop in their place, they will start to sprout when it's the right time for them. And I've found that those regrowing volunteers, as they're called, when they regrow in the fall, those are usually my best cilantro harvests. So in a way, I'm planting in the spring, getting a little bit, but really banking on the volunteers being my best harvest. And they are just starting to sprout. They're probably 3 to 4 inches long at the end of October. So they really will start to shine over the winter here in Zone 8A, and they'll get even better as we head into the early part of the spring. That's in my climate, so definitely adjust that based on yours. But that's one thing that I'm looking forward to right now is some fresh cilantro. Number 7, this isn't really anything I'm doing, but something I wanted to share with you because this is something relatively new to me. I know you're going to laugh, especially if you're in the South, because you're like, this is new to you. Yes, and that is collard greens. Collard greens are not something that I ever grew up eating, which is, like I said, kind of surprising in the South. But when I started growing them a couple of years ago and started sauteing them with garlic in the winter, it became one of my favorite things to do over the winter. Anytime you can get anything fresh in the winter, it just tastes better and it just feels good to be able to eat something fresh in the middle of the winter. And this time of year, I've got my collards. They're growing strong. And one thing I love about them is how low maintenance they are. If you can get them through the cabbage worm damage or anything in the fall that we deal with in general, they start loving the temperatures when it starts getting cool. And then I can start harvesting them. And like I said, I saute it with some garlic and salt and pepper, obviously, for simple winter meals. But here's the thing. Collards are packed with vitamins A, C, K, calcium, and iron, and these are nutrients that our body especially benefits from as we head into the cold months. And if we harvest collards after a freeze, the cold temperatures actually convert their starches to sugar, and this makes them even sweeter and more tender. This is the time of year to be really enjoying those collard greens. And if you haven't planted them yet, make a note for next year to do that. You can still plant them in the spring. The taste may just be a little bit different, but still, it might be worth it for you to compare. How does it taste in the spring versus how does it taste in the fall? Again, another way to make gardening fun. Step number 8, hopefully I will have already done this at the end of October, if not the 1st of November, but it just depends on if I'm able to get my area ready, and that is planting garlic. And this is just a reminder that garlic is, for many people, the final planting task of the year. For me, it's going to be short day onions, of course, but this is a reminder, if you haven't yet, for most places, November is still a perfectly fine time to plant. Step number 9, this is something I'm going to do during those cold and rainy days, and that is I'm going to go into my closet where I have my stored onions, potatoes, and garlic from the summer harvest, and I need to start picking through those. Many of the onions that I've stored, they've already started to soften or sprout. Worst case scenario, some have started to rot, and this is definitely something that I want to get out and put in the compost bin. Ideally, I would have chopped and frozen all of the onions where I wouldn't have had any that have done this, but if you heard the podcast episode last week, you understand that didn't completely happen. But if there are any that are kind of on the verge, if I have the energy to, this would be a great time to chop and freeze to be able to use over the winter. Same thing with potatoes. They're definitely starting to get soft, some more than others, and if they're starting to sprout, I'm trying to use them as quickly as I can. Ideally, I would have canned those potatoes. I may still be able to get some of them canned if I have time, but otherwise I will chop them and use them in fresh eating as long as I can, and then compost the rest. One thing I've noticed with garlic, though, is that my hardneck garlic that I harvested in late June, early July, they're already starting to dry out and soften, just reiterating the fact that many hardneck varieties don't store as long as softneck. But I am checking my softneck garlic. It still is doing great. It's very firm and it's able to be used really easily. And I know it's going to last for several more months. Still, it's a good idea to check because any of the garlic that has softened, we want to get it out so it doesn't help spoil the other ones that's in there. That's the case for garlic. That's the case for onions and potatoes as well. As I'm culling some of these onions, potatoes, even garlic that are not needing to be stored anymore, I'm going to be making room for sweet potatoes because I harvested them. I've had them in the greenhouse curing, and now they need to come inside to store for the winter. And finally, number 10, this is something that I love to do on one of those nice November days where it's sunny and just a little bit cool, but very comfortable. I want to tackle my compost pile that I have been adding to all year long. I'm a lazy composter, so I just pile and pile and pile and pile. I don't mix it like I should. If you want a quick compost, you definitely need to turn it and you'd babysit it and do all these things. I don't do that. I just pile it on. And at the end of the year, what I'll do is I'll take my pitchfork and I will take off the top of the compost that hasn't completely broken down yet. Then under that, about half of the compost bin toward the bottom, I've got really rich, good looking compost. I'll harvest that and then I'll use it to top off my beds. Right now, I'll probably be putting them in many of my raised beds, the ones that don't have cover crops in them, because if we're gardening in raised beds, then the soil is going to naturally settle, especially if we use a fluffy type of compost or any kind of garden mix, and we want to top that off with new compost. I love doing this in the fall with my homemade compost because sometimes it isn't 100% composted yet. Sometimes there's some bigger bits in there that still need to compost, and the fall is the best time to put that on the soil because not only can it continue to compost in place, but it also allows that mixture of all the soil, microorganisms, and life, and whenever the temperatures start to warm up in the spring, it's ready to go, and it's a great medium for growing vegetables in the spring. So adding compost now when we can will continue to enrich that soil, making it a great time and a great environment for those spring crops to be able to thrive when the spring comes. So that's what's happening in my garden right now in November. It's a mix of harvesting, planting, protecting what's still growing, and preparing for next season. It may not look like a whole lot from the outside, but every little thing I'm doing now does make next spring's garden a whole lot easier, and in many cases allows me to get more of my harvest going into the winter than I would if I hadn't have taken some of these steps. Now, again, if you haven't gone through the free 5-day garden audit, remember it's still available. This is a simple way to reflect on what went well, and I guide you through questions that will help you identify what's important to you. I hear from a lot of people that you have lots of ideas, but it helps to be guided into how to organize those ideas in a way that makes sense when you do get ready to plan your next garden. Now, next week, as I said, we're shifting from the garden to the kitchen table, where I'm going to be going on a deep dive into the vegetables and the herbs that you're likely already growing or that you may choose to grow next year. If you're in the US, maybe making an appearance on your Thanksgiving table. This one has been fun for me to research. I can't wait to share it with you. I bet you'll learn something. I learned some things that I didn't know. So make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast so that you can listen next week as it drops on Tuesday, especially as you're preparing for your Thanksgiving meal. Until then, enjoy these cooler days in the garden and the little wins that come with them. And I will meet you back here on next week's episode. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll chat with you next week.